there will be a day of reckoning, and the reach of international justice can be long.
And the ICC prosecutor, Luis Moreno Ocampo, spoke at The Hague and said he might open an investigation into Libya in a few days. He also warned that anyone who attacks civilians will be held accountable.
And I'd like to put on notice everyone in Libya, everyone who decides to attack civilians could be investigated and prosecuted. And the commanders have peculiar responsibilities, because the commanders are in charge of the army, and they know whatever the troops do, they could be responsible.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our three guests now. From Geneva, Peggy Hicks, Global Advocacy Director for Human Rights Watch. From Manchester, Azaldine Sharif from the British Libyan Solidarity Campaign for Human Rights. And joining us here in Doha, Tariq Youssef, a Senior Research Fellow at the Dubai School of Government. I want to thank all three of you for joining us in the discussion. Peggy Hicks, if I could start with you. Your reaction then to what's being talked about over there in Geneva. Are things now moving in the right direction as you see it?
Yes, absolutely. We think the Security Council decision on Saturday was a crucial one. The Security Council acted unanimously, but the messages that you just heard from Moreno Ocampo, Minister Haig, and Catherine Ashton are the right ones. The accountability is not just for Gaddafi, but for his henchmen and for anyone who acts and follows on his orders. What we want those people to know is that their actions are also, they can be held accountable, and that firing on civilians or taking actions of that sort could lead to a trip to The Hague for them as well.
Azaldine Sharif, strong words of condemnation from Geneva, promises to take concerted action, but they are at the end of the day still just words. Is that going to be enough?
Well, the Libyan people are really cautious. They are watching the international community and very worried. The only thing that they don't want to be occupied or invaded by an army which will be staying there for longer time. Apart from that, the Libyan people, they would welcome any punishment against Gaddafi's regime. So we have to be very careful about the sensitivity of the issue here.
Tariq Youssef, does it seem to you perhaps that that there's a shift in momentum here, that events outside Libya at the moment seem to be moving quite a bit faster than events inside at the moment? And is that something that concerns you? Because it does seem right now as though Gaddafi and the people around him are going nowhere, and they're going to fight to the death.
Absolutely. I think the international community has reacted rather swiftly and decisively in the last 72 hours. This is important because in the previous week, all events were taking place in Libya with very little clear international attention, let alone decision-making or outcomes. I think at the moment, the strong messages coming out of the UN Human Rights Council are particularly critical, because it's exactly at this moment where we're seeing what resembles a standoff inside of Libya, and where Gaddafi's troops are being rallied to perhaps launch counterattacks against the cities that fell in the hands of the opposition. So those statements coming today out of Geneva and the threats and warnings of accountability, justice, and the reach of the international community, I think are precisely what is needed to perhaps make the people around Gaddafi think twice. The commanders in particular, the people who can inflict a lot of damage on the population.
Well, Gaddafi's regime is no stranger to accusations against human rights violations. We're going to talk a little bit more about that now. According to Human Rights Watch, an estimated 213 prisoners who have served their sentences or been acquitted by Libyan courts remain locked up. In 1996, a massacre at Abu Salim prison left 1,200 inmates dead. The authorities have not made any account public nor held anyone responsible. There are no independent NGOs, and Libyan laws severely restrict freedom of association. Law 71 bans any opposition, and the punishment is death. In 2006, Human Rights Watch accused Libya of forcibly trying to repatriate African migrants whose lives were in danger in their hometown. The Libyan government continues to detain girls and women indefinitely for what it calls social rehabilitation. Many of them have committed no crime. Some are held only because they have been raped. And of course, most recently, the treatment against the Libyan people for uprising against Gaddafi's regime was met with extreme violence. The death toll now stands at over 1,000. Peggy Hicks, if I could turn back to you on this then. As we just documented, this isn't the first time that Gaddafi's regime has committed the kinds of violations that we've seen over the last few days. But what does that say about the credibility of the UN human rights body, given past violations not only from Libya, but other countries on that body?
Well, it's a good question, and obviously the fact that the international community has stood up and taken action on Libya doesn't excuse the fact that they allowed those abuses to go on previously, and we would have liked to see stronger action by this body on earlier accounts. But we do hope that the Libya action that's being taken now can send a signal across the region and across the world to other places where there are still the types of abuses that you just outlined in Libya occurring. And this council that's meeting here now ought to look at those and take them seriously. Egypt, for example, is a country where there was endemic human rights abuse, and Egypt itself continually pushed against a discussion of those issues here in the council. We're hoping that now Egypt and others will lead the call for cases like Libya to be taken before the council. And as you probably know, the General Assembly is now poised to take action tomorrow, suspending Libya from membership in this body.
But suspending Libya from membership, I mean, if we look at this in terms of what's happening on the ground inside Tripoli, I mean, Gaddafi and his leaders are still sitting there, and they're showing no intention of moving. What effect, on a practical level, is that really going to have?
That's only one measure, along with the others we've talked about. But I take exception to your comment that it's just words. There are also the arms embargo and the sanctions, the travel bans and sanctions that are being put in place. Those are things that can have an impact. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes too long to see the impact of those actions. But what we really need now is for Gaddafi and those around him to know how isolated they are. And I think every step, every little nail that goes in is one that shows those who can make a difference in the situation in Libya that they don't want to stand and go down with this ship. They want to support the people and their rights, and to make that clear.
Tariq Youssef, what we're seeing from the international community right now in terms of taking concerted action, is this perhaps because things are so front and center right now in the world with what's happening in Libya? Is this the reason why action is being taken when there have been violations long before this, and now because it's in the news, now leaders are being forced to act?
I think the international community, certainly the US and the Europeans, are taking note of the fact that what perhaps we're seeing in the Arab world at the moment is not just a one-time event or a one-country phenomena. This is Tunisia, followed by Egypt, followed by Libya, with unrests in Bahrain recently, and strong signals that the regime in Yemen is also